We're going to be in Luke at the very end of Luke chapter 22 is where we're going to start. And we've been in this series going through the Gospel of Luke and exploring the life of Jesus, the things that he said, the things that he did, and what he was about. And the reason why we do this is because if we say that we're followers of Jesus Christ, and we say that's something that we are. Maybe you've heard about Jesus, and maybe you're still learning about Jesus. Maybe you're just exploring this idea about following Jesus. You want to know what Jesus said and did and what he's about. Because being a Christian means to say, I'm a follower of his. I'm doing the things that he did, which means that we need to know what he was about. And so we've started off kind of right at the beginning of the year going through this and looking at Luke, starting from him being born. And now we're coming up towards the close and towards the end, and we're going to be looking today at the crucifixion, Jesus' death on the cross. And we've looked at all the different things along the way, and we kind of kicked off with Jesus' mission at the beginning of Luke. And what Jesus said that he was about was to bring hope to the hopeless, to bring joy and freedom and liberty to those who have been enslaved and who have been captive. And so that's where we started. And really, the whole book is slowly bringing us closer and closer to the culmination where Jesus buys the freedom that he promised. And if you were with us last week we talked about how coming to the cross was God's plan A. You guys heard that, right? There's a plan A, and if that doesn't work, then there's a plan B and then a plan C. Jesus going to the cross has always been God's plan A from the very beginning. And as we look and as we explore this and go, this is God's plan A, that despite knowing that the cross was going to be something that was going to be horrific and horrible and agonizing, Jesus says, I am willing to go through with it because I love you so much. And tonight what we're going to do is we're going to be looking kind of at this crucifixion story, starting at the end of chapter 22, going all the way in through kind of 23, and we're going to look at different pieces. And I want to help you guys understand it. We're really going to mostly just kind of understand this story and try to wrap our heads around it and kind of get a big, fuller picture of what's happened here. And as we go through this, I want us to know a couple of different things. One, this is real. This is real history that we're going to be reading. These are things that actually has happened. If you not even look at the Bible, but if you look at other sources outside of the Bible, you will find that they talk about there's this guy named Jesus, and you can read and piece together some of the things that he taught about and the things that he did, and that he was crucified by the Romans, and then they also say that, people believe that he raised from the dead. So if you don't even look at the Bible and you look at just other sources, you're going to find all of that. That Jesus was a real person, that he was crucified, and that people claim that he rose from the dead without even looking at the Bible. This is real. This is actual history and not just a made-up story that we find in the Bible. Because the Bible itself is real, is true. And so what we're going to be looking at is a first-hand account of what happened to Jesus Christ on the cross. So this was real. So that's one of the first things that I want us to think about as we look through this crucifixion story. 2, remember, this was God's plan A. This was God's plan and purpose from the very beginning to say, I know that you guys are going to make a mistake. You guys are going to sin in the garden at the very beginning, and that this sin is going to cause this separation between us, and it's going to break things, and it's going to be, we can't have community anymore, and it's broken. And I can't be with you because of sin. But my plan is that I'm going to bring you back into community with me by taking care of the sin problem by going to the cross, even though he knew it was agonizing and painful and hard. And the third thing that I want us to remember as we look through this story is that this is a display of God's great love for us. We're going to look at it, and some of it's going to be kind of graphic and horrific. But what I want us not to come away with is, look how terrible this was. But to look at it and go, wow, God is so gracious and loving and loved me so much that he'd be willing to endure all of this for me, for you, for us. And so we're going to kind of pick up this story. Jesus, he just had the final meal with his disciples. He's been telling them and trying to prepare them for this, but it's kind of hard because they don't fully comprehend everything that's going to go on. They're not sure, even though Jesus had said some things, it hasn't quite sunk into their mind yet what is about to happen. And so they're having this meal. And after the meal, they go off into the garden. And Jesus is praying. Did I write the song? Did I write the right one? Hold up a second. Did I copy the wrong thing in here? Oh no, this is right. We're not quite there. That's my fault. I apologize. So Jesus is praying in the garden. Judas comes. Judas was one of the 12 disciples. And he's there, and then what he does is he goes off, and for 30 pieces of silver, he decides to say, no, I'm going to show the religious leaders, the army that the religious leaders have gotten together in the middle of the night where Jesus is, because they would plan to arrest him and put him on trial and try to kill him. That's their goal. And so they get Judas, and Judas is like, well, I'll let you know where he is. I'll bring you to him. I'll point him out so that your guards will be able to know who he is in the dead of night. And so in the middle of the night, Judas comes, and with a regular, kind of a normal greeting of a kiss, he comes up and points Jesus out to the army that has come to take him away. And they take him away, and they bring him before the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish council. And they start putting him on trial and making fun of him and mocking him and spitting on him. They would blindfold him and they'd smack him and say, hey, figure out who did it to you. And they were doing these things. They finally bring him before the religious leaders. And then it says this in chapter 22. It says, if you are the Christ, tell us. But he said to them, if I tell you, you will not believe me. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of God, at the right hand of the power of God. And so they said to them, are you the Son of God? And he said to them, you say that I am. And he said, what further testimony do we need? We have heard it from his own lips. And so what they're talking to Jesus and like, are you really trying to tell us that you're God? And Jesus ultimately is like, yep, you said it, and you're right. And they get so angry because Jesus is like, he knows that their hearts have already been set. They've already made up their minds. They're just looking for an excuse to kill him. They're not really trying to understand Jesus and what he's doing and who he is. They don't really care. They're just so mad and upset with him. They're looking for any reason, an excuse that they can to be able to get rid of him. And so they ask him, they prod him like, are you the Son of Man? He's like, yes, I am God, but you're not going to believe me if I tell you. And they finally just go, we got you. You say that you're the Son of God. And this isn't news. Jesus had made these claims throughout his time on earth, preaching and teaching. He's made these claims that he's the Son of God. But they finally go, oh yeah, well, we got you, and we're going to get you for this. And they said, you have blasphemed, you have made yourself equal to God, and we can kill you for that. Now the problem is, the Jews actually didn't have the power and authority to be able to execute anyone because they were under Roman rule at the time. And so they had to go and they had to take Jesus. This is all happening in the middle of the night because, they didn't want to do it during the day. Do it during the night when they can try to be sneaky about it and when they can hide things and, nothing really if you were a government agency and you were trying to do stuff in the middle of the night, it's kind of on the sketchy side, not like the legitimate side. So they were doing something that they knew was kind of legitimate, that they wanted to hide it in the darkness of night. And so they finally, in the morning, they bring him before Pilate. Now, Pilate is the ruler set up by the Roman government to rule over the city of Jerusalem. And so they bring him before Pilate. And Pilate starts talking to him. And in verse 23, or chapter 23, verses 2 and 5, he starts asking Jesus some questions. You got the slides for that, guys? No? All righty. We're 23, verses 2 and 5. And they begin to accuse him. So they come storming into Pilate's palace. They say, throw Jesus onto the ground and they start telling Pilate, hey, this guy. And they began to accuse Jesus, saying, we found this man misleading the nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is the Christ, the King. Now let's think about those things. So is that what they found about Jesus in the previous trial where they were trying to get dirt on him? No, it's not. It's different. But then they come to Pilate, and they know that if they just argued like, well, in our religion, we have to kill people who say that they're equal to God, he'd be like, go away, get out of here. But what they do is they come up with these other charges against Jesus because Rome, they're in control of the whole nation. And so they pretty much said, you can kind of self-govern under yourself, under our rulers, to be able to help you, providing that you pay your taxes, you don't cause any problems, and you acknowledge that Caesar is like the highest guy that there is. And so they come up and they say, well, this guy is trying to riot and take us away from Roman rule. He doesn't want us to pay the taxes that we're supposed to pay. And he is claiming that he himself is the king and that Caesar isn't. Those aren't exactly true statements about Jesus, because Jesus said, if render things to God that are God's, but also pay the taxes to the things that are due to Caesar. And he wasn't trying to start a revolt. Yes, he was the king of Israel, but he wasn't worried about a political kingdom. And so they were making things up to try to get Pilate to get rid of him. Now Pilate, he asks Jesus in verse 3, are you the king of the Jews? And he answered him, you have said so. Then Pilate said to the chief officers and the crowds, I found no guilt in this man. But they were urgent, saying, he stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea and from Galilee, even to this place. And so they're like, come on, Pilate, don't throw us out of here. He really is a bad guy that you need to get rid of. And Pilate decides, King Herod is in town, and King Herod kind of oversaw the region of Galilee. And because there was this big festival, he came down to Jerusalem to take part. And so he's like, oh, well, he's from Galilee. Well, maybe I'm going to try to get rid of this problem and have Herod deal with it. And Herod was excited when Jesus came. He's like, man, I've been hearing all these things about Jesus. I want Jesus kind of put on a show for me. Like, let's see some miracles, bud. And so he gets in. He's like excited to see Jesus. And he comes in and starts questioning Jesus. And he hears all the charges that he's conspiring and trying to overthrow Rome and not pay taxes and set himself up as the new political king over Israel. And he's like, I don't see it. Jesus actually doesn't say anything to him. Do we have verses 8 and 9, guys? That was the last one. Okay, we lost some slides. I am sorry. So in verses 8 and 9, when Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had a long desire to see him, because he had heard about him and was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. Jesus was just like, I don't really have anything to say to you. I don't need to say anything. Jesus could have defended himself. He could have said, no, these are all fake charges, and got himself acquitted. But he chose not to. We just kind of continue to let things happen. And so Herod, hoping to see some signs, doesn't see anything. He's like, okay, well, I don't want to deal with you. Go back to Pilate. And so they send him back to Pilate. And Pilate is like, oh, man, I don't want to deal with this problem, because Pilate, as the ruler over Israel or over Jerusalem, he kind of had like one main job for the Romans, and that was to not cause any problems, to not let the Israelites cause a whole lot of problems, and to like start another revolt. And so he is trying to make everyone happy and kind of protect himself politically, and to protect him, make sure that he didn't have a riot on his hands, and like, because otherwise the emperor might come in and like, oh, you're done, get out of here. So he's trying to like, I really don't want to deal with this problem of Jesus. And so he's like, there's no real reason for me to execute him. But the Jewish religious kept on coming and going, no, we want you to crucify him. And then one last final attempt by Pilate to try to save Jesus, because he recognized that Jesus was really innocent of everything that he was being accused of. He said, hey, normally, as a gesture of goodwill, I will release one criminal during this time was Passover, which was a big festival, kind of like we have like Easter and Christmas. It was a big holiday. And so during this holiday, I normally release a prisoner to you guys. I can release Jesus. Like, I can be that, he can be that guy. And the crowd, the people who had gathered, that the religious leader had brought in, they're all going, no, we want you to crucify him. Like, then who should I release to you? And they go, let's release this guy named Barabbas. Like, Barabbas? This guy, he's a murderer. This guy is actually a guy who's been trying to overthrow Rome and has caused like the Roman army to like at different point in time have to like subdue like this revolt that he's started. This guy is an actual guy who's actually guilty of all the trumped up charges that they have brought against Jesus. And if you want Barabbas to be released, you're accusing this guy over here of all these fake charges, and you want him crucified, and you want to let go the guy that actually has done all those things. And Pilate is blown away. He's like, I don't get it. And finally, because ultimately he's scared, he doesn't want another revolt on his hands. He finally just goes, fine, I'll let you have it. I'll release the criminal, and I'll let you guys execute the innocent man. And if you think about it, this is really a substitute, is a picture of what happens for us. Because we're the prisoner, we're the one who's truly guilty. Jesus is fully innocent. And what he does for Barabbas is what he does for us. We swap places. Barabbas, we get set free. Jesus gets the punishment. And so Barabbas gets set free. He's released. And Jesus is handed over to the executioners. And what they would do to people who are going to be executed is they would flog them. And they would take this whip. And in this whip, they would have these lengths of leather and rope. And embedded them were pieces of stone and glass and bone. And they would take this and they would stretch the person over like a board so that their hand was like they're pulled up. And they were just stretched over, and their legs were pulled down, and they just kind of pulled tight. And then they would take this whip, and they would whip you with it. And what would happen with the stone, the bone, the glass that was embedded into these cords on this whip, they would kind of wrap around into you, and then they would yank and pull so that it would rip open your flesh. And they did it from their back and all the way down your legs. And so that's what they did to Jesus. And they whipped him, prepared him for execution. And they did this torture, and they mocked him, they made fun of him, say, you really are the King of the Jews? Really? And they made a crown of thorns and they pressed it into his head. And we're not talking little like thorns that you might find on a rose. We're talking thorns that are closer to like 1 to 2 inches in length, and they would embed that into his head. And so the blood would be dripping down, probably into his eyes and into his mouth. His back has been torn up. He is so weak that what they would do is they'd say, okay, part of your execution process is we're going to parade you through town. And so this is what the Romans do to people who we don't like, who are found to be criminals, who revolt against the Romans. And they parade them through town, and they have to carry their own cross to the place where they are going to be executed. But Jesus, who was so weak from the whipping and from the torture that he couldn't carry it, they had to bring someone else, and they carried it. And so they bring him to this place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. And what they would do, they'd lay the cross down, and the Roman guards would take the man who's to be executed, they'd smack him down onto the cross, stretch out his arms, and they would take these metal spikes that are probably around this long, and they would stick it right around here. Because if you put it here, what would happen if you're hanging on the cross, that'd actually just rip off your flesh in between your fingers and you just fall off. So they would stick you right here so that you wouldn't fall, stretched out pretty tight. And then they would get both your feet together and then send another spike through your feet. And one, that is extremely painful to have a giant metal spike get pressed through your wrists and through your feet. And then once they get you on there, they'd raise you up and they'd have this hole kind of pre-dug. And the cross would slam down into the hole while you're on it. And what would ultimately end up killing you on the cross was the fact that you couldn't really breathe. When your arms are stretched out and you're being suspended by here, what happens is it pulls on your shoulders and can partially dislocate your shoulders, and it presses up and pulls up your rib cage so that you actually you can't breathe. And that's why people would die, is because they would run out of air. But that process could take up to 3 days. And so what you'd have to do is you'd actually have to, when you're suspended here, you'd actually have to push up with your legs on the metal spike that's through your feet so that you can take a breath and then collapse back down. And this is what Jesus did. And while he was on the cross, while he was there, he had 2 criminals who were executed, one on each side. One of them started making fun of Jesus. Like, dude, you're on a cross too. But he started making fun of, like, you really thought you were like Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, and making fun of him? The other guy on the other side goes, I truly believe that you are the Christ. And Jesus said, you're going to be with me in paradise today. So he's there on the cross, and he calls out this amazing thing. He says, I'm going to commit my spirit to you, but then he also says this, another amazing thing where he says, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. They aren't realizing that they are really killing the Son of God. They don't know that. They don't fully get it. And so even in the midst of the agony, the pain, and the torture, Jesus says, I want to forgive. I want to forgive because I want them to be able to join me in paradise. This is why I'm here on the cross. And so it tells us in verse 44 that it was now the 6th hour, and they start counting the hours from sunup. So a little after midday. And there was darkness over the whole land. So think of that, midday, lunchtime, then all of a sudden darkness for 3 hours while Jesus was sitting on the cross. The 3 hours. And while the sun's light faded, the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Now, at the temple, what would happen at the temple is there was this thick curtain. It was made of these multiple layers of different types of fabrics and leather and animal skins, and it was really thick, probably when all put together, close to like 9 inches, a foot wide. And what it tells us is that this curtain separated the holy, where God's presence was supposed to dwell, the holiest of holy places. They only went in there one time a year, and it was only a high priest, from the rest of the temple that the other priests could do, and they'd make sacrifices and do all the different other forms of worship, acts of worship that they were supposed to do. And it says that that curtain, when Jesus died, was split in half. And what that was a picture of and what represented is that the access to the holy place, to God, that has been always been partially hidden because of our sin, has been torn and has been taken away. And that's what Jesus Christ did on the cross. And he commits his spirit and he dies. And after he died, some of the followers of Christ, they came, they took his body, and they put it in a tomb. And they thought it was all over. And what we're going to look at next week is we're going to look at the resurrection. But I want us to see, this was what Jesus endured. This is real. This was God's plan A. But he did it because he loved you. He endured the fake trial. He endured the ridicule, the mocking. He endured the flesh being ripped off him. He endured the spikes in his hand and his feet, being on the cross, enduring all that, even though he was innocent, because he wanted to take your place, just like he took Barabbas' place, so that you can have a relationship with him, so that your sin could be dealt with. He did it so that you could have his perfect life, so that you could stand before God and he look at you and say, your sin has been forgiven and taken care of, and you have the righteousness of my son. You can enter in relationship with me. And he did all of this because he loved us. He loved you. And there's so much more to this story, and if you have time, read through chapter 23 of Luke. Look at some of the other gospels that go in and share different perspectives of this story, and you can get some more different details about it. But it's amazing what Jesus has endured because he loved us, because he cared about us. He cared about you. This was his plan from the beginning. This was real, and he did it because he loves you so much. We're going to head off into our breakout rooms, and as we think about the story of the crucifixion that we celebrate with Easter that's coming up, we celebrate that Jesus doesn't stay dead in the tomb. But I want you guys to go off to your breakout rooms and think about this story and talk about what does it mean that God loves us so much that he would endure all of this so that you can have life with him. I'm going to pray for us and we'll go. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for your son, Jesus Christ, and what he did and what he endured on the cross. The agony, the pain, physically, the agony, the pain of being separated from you and having to bear sin for the first time. He took all that because he loved me. He loved us. And we're so grateful for that and what you have done for us. And so, God, help us to fully understand what that means and help us to know that you did it because it loves us, you loved us, and that means that we need to live differently. Bless the discussion that we're about to have. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.